Welcome back to this demonstration of the various ways to add FF&E to a project. In just a minute we're going to look at some very powerful tools that can add more than one item at a time. But first let's look at a few final details of what to do after you've added these placeholder specs and objects into the rooms. At any point in time that I want to start detailing these specs, I have two things I can do. The first is I can just go to the specs screen, probably sort by vendor, and start making calls or looking things up in catalogs. The other way we can do it is to simply go down to these summary areas and double click on one of the items, and that'll bring it up in editing mode in the spec screen. Make my changes, select a vendor, and so forth, save it, and then it'll take me back and update the screen for me. So there's two different ways to start filling out the actual project. Now let's do something to get started with building our guest rooms, but let's do it with some of our time-saving tools. I'll move to the room list, click on Add, and then Import. With some pre-planning, I've created some prototype hotel rooms that I can pull into this project. On my display, I find the first prototype for a king. And we'll find it in the standard prototype project. I'll select that room. It found just one conflicting tag, so I'm going to have to rename this tag when it comes in so that it does not interfere with the existing floor 01. So I'm going to call this floor 02. And I also want to make the spec ID the same as the tag that I've changed, so I'm going to check that. Then I'll accept those changes, and that resolves the conflict, and I'll accept that. That one had a budget already built in, and it came in with a room count of 18. Let's change that to 22. And then we'll save that. Again, we'll get a reminder that any new specs that come in need to be double checked for shipping information. But now our room is there. And if I go to the FF&E Worksheet, it updates so that now I have a complete set of information that goes into a basic guest room. It may not be everything for this particular project, but you're way ahead of the game in terms of creating the necessary items. In addition, you're going to find that these items already have the upholstery attached that you would normally have to attach yourself. Going back to the guest rooms, let's pull in another room. We'll import. This time we'll pick our projects a little bit quicker. A standard prototype, there's the queen. Select that. This time we'll get a few more conflicts to resolve, but you'll see that they are the same because they came from that same project just a second ago. These are just items that were shared by those two different rooms. So we're going to use the current, which has already been pre-selected, and we'll just simply say accept changes, and then there are a few specs left that were conflicts, but they're still the same specs, so we're going to use current on those, accept changes, then accept the room, and save it. So now we have two rooms that can be the building block of other variations in the project. For instance, we know that we are going to need a ADA accessible handicap type room, and that's going to have a king bed in it. So let's start with the king room, and instead of importing it, although we of course could build that in our prototype project, I'm going to take the current king room and clone it. And so we'll give it a room ID of KG-ADA, and we'll add ADA accessible to the name. Throw in a phase, and then there's going to be, let's say, one per floor. It's a 10-floor hotel, so there will be 10 of those. Save that, and now we've got the ADA accessible. Of course, it's the identical room right now, so what would be different? Well, the first thing to do would be to go to the FF&E Worksheet, find our KG80A room and then find the bed frame for it, because that is going to be slightly higher. So we'll look through there. There it is right there. Mattress and box springs. Now if you look down below, the Bed 01 object is composed actually of two products, the mattress and box springs and the bed base. But the bed base, if I were to double click this and edit it, I'd be editing the standard bed base for the entire project. I don't want to do that because that, again, changes you make at the source will flow through the entire project. What I actually need is a replacement for this standard bed. And there are several ways to do this. I'm going to show you the one that fits with what you've seen so far. So what I'm going to do is change this occurrence into something else. Now before we were adding, and it's very important to understand that if you want to change something that's already there to something else, you're going to edit that occurrence. So I'm going to click Edit, and that's going to bring up the Bed 01 object highlighted in this same room that we're in. And what I want to do is switch it out with a accessible bed, which doesn't exist yet. So what I'll do is create a new object, and we'll call this Bed 01A for accessible. I'll make it really obvious, ADA, so we can really tell the difference here. And we'll create that as bed accessible. Of course, FF&EZ is suggesting a placeholder spec, but we already know that this mattress and box springs that we need already exist. This is not the accessible part, this is just the standard part. So we're going to go over to attach an existing spec. I'll type B, which brings up the B's in the spec list, and it gets me Bed 01. Now we'll move to the secondary component, and this is where the major change actually occurs. We need to create a placeholder spec for the bed base, and I remembered that the bed base's spec had the idea of Bed 02, so I'm going to create a new spec with an ADA suffix on it, and it will be bed base accessible. And the usual things apply. There's going to be one bed base per bed object, and then I can save this new object. And now it appears on the object pick list, and it's already selected, so all I have to do now is save it. Now remember that we are editing an occurrence, so up at the top it now says existing item will be replaced as opposed to item will be added. And we're also reminded that we are editing the occurrence of Bed 01 in this room. So when I click Save, I'm replacing Bed 01 with Bed 01 ADA. And that's pretty much it. This is one of the most powerful features of FF&EZ. Once you understand the way that this data is structured and the logic behind it, you can make very quick changes to projects. You can clone rooms, make changes, add things on the fly, and do all sorts of things that lets you stay in control of the way the project is going to print. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that there might be other ways to do this. If you are already familiar with your specs and know that some items can be cloned, in particular this bed base that was probably just a variation of the same manufacturer's standard bed base, you could have gone straight to the spec screen and cloned that spec first so that you pick up all the other descriptive information and then just change the specific things like the height needed for the accessible bed base. And that would give you a new spec that would be available when you created that object. You could also have cloned the object itself, which would have given you an exact copy of the standard bed, and then switched out the bed base with that spec that you had created by cloning the spec itself. And all these things become much more obvious once you spend time playing with the structure and the way that FF&EZ works. Finally, let's look at some of the reports that you can use. Remember that the reports on the FF&E worksheet where we're at right now are the ones used for presentation. They show only what's been used in the project, that is, only what appears in the worksheet. This means that you can keep alternate specs and just backups of specs in the project, so that if a decision is made to change the budget or change a design and that decision might be reversed, you can always put those things back in place by switching them. As your project progresses, you'll want to be able to check the information that you've entered. Of course, you can print reports and check those, but there's another tool that can save a lot of time. That's the setup check. When you click this, it will create a complex query that looks for missing information, such as vendors that have not been selected, quantities that have not been entered, or other things like that, especially costs that have not been entered or quantities of components. Running this query also lets you use it to print reports, so you can print essentially a punch list of items that need to be double checked for completeness. In addition to that tool, on the spec screen and the object screens, you'll find a usage report. And the usage report basically lists the specs that are in the list, including those that have not been used, so that you can double check that they are alternates as opposed to things that were simply missed in placing items in rooms. Now, speaking of reports, let's go back to the FF&E worksheet. As I mentioned in earlier segments, this is where you show the system what goes in the project. Of course, you can have alternates that aren't being used. So this is also where you're going to find the reports that are used for presentation. We'll click on Print, and there's a large selection of reports. One of the first ones you probably would be interested in is the object illustration sheet. The report has two formats. One has a single image of the primary component, and the other is a multiple image format that prints an image for each component that you have one attached to. When I preview this, you'll see that FF&EZ pulls the object together. It does all the math for you, calculating all the quantities of the total number of objects needed as well as the components that are needed. It will show you where the object is located based on what you have, where you've placed it in the FF&E worksheet. So what you have here is essentially a sheet from a project book. There are a number of other reports on the FF&E worksheet. Again, this is where the presentation reports are kept. And you'll want to look at the sample reports that may have been sent to you, and if you have this demo, you'll want to browse through these reports and try them. This concludes our tour of the FF&EZ Design program. Thank you for watching.